Most men my age are afraid of the phone call that comes from hospital. I spent 2 years bracing for that one. The one about my own heart, or the one about somebody I love. And then on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the call that finally cracked my whole life open didn't come from hospital at all. It came from a 24-year-old plumber I'd hired that morning, standing in my own basement, and his voice was shaking so badly I could barely make out the words. "Mr. Beck," he said. "Sir, you need to come home, and I think you need to call the police. My name is Walter Beck. I'm 71 years old. I spent 38 years as a branch manager for a community bank in Dayton, Ohio. 38 years of teaching young tellers how to count a drawer twice, how to spot a forged endorsement, how to tell the difference between a nervous customer and a dangerous one. I could smell a bad check across a lobby. I built my whole career on one simple idea, that trust is the most valuable thing a person hands you, and the most dangerous thing to hand back carelessly. I want you to remember that I knew all of that, 38 years of it, because it makes what happened to me harder to admit and more important to tell. 2 years ago, I lost my wife. Rosemary and I were married 46 years. She had a stroke on a Tuesday morning while I was out getting the car's oil changed, and by the time I got home, the ambulance was already in the driveway, and she was gone within the week. 46 years, and I wasn't even home. I've never quite forgiven myself for the oil change. She was the organized one, Rosemary. She kept a chart on the fridge of when to rotate the tires and when the grandkids' birthdays were and which night was trash night, because she knew I'd let all of it slide into chaos without her, and I have. She alphabetized the spice rack. She did the crossword in pen and never once in 46 years asked me for the answer. When she died, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the person who ran the machinery of my life so quietly I'd forgotten there was machinery at all, and a man standing in the wreckage of that, staring at a fridge chart in his dead wife's handwriting, is not thinking clearly about who he lets in the door. What I want you to understand about losing Rosemary is that it didn't just make me sad. It made me stupid. I don't have a gentler word for it. A lonely man is a stupid man, and I was the loneliest I'd ever been in my life, rattling around a house that still smelled like her, and I would have done nearly anything, believed nearly anyone, to make the quiet in that house a little less total, which is exactly the kind of man that people like Dale go looking for. Before I tell you about Dale, and about the plumber and the wall and what was behind it, do an old man one small kindness. If you've ever been lonely enough to ignore your own good judgment, tap subscribe. It's free, and it tells me this story found somebody who'll understand it. Give it a like as well. And stay with me to the end, because I'm going to ask you a question I still can't answer for myself, and I want to hear how you'd have called it. Let me tell you about my son first, because he's the hero of this story, even though I spent a year treating him like the villain. His name is Marcus. He's 40. He's an accountant, careful and quiet, takes after Rosemary more than me. After his mother died, Marcus called me every single day, without fail, just to hear my voice, just to make sure the old man had eaten something and gotten out his chair. I didn't deserve those calls, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Because about 8 months after the funeral, Dale came into my life. And within a year, I'd let Dale talk me into pushing my own son away. Dale Rooker. I met him because I hired him. A handyman. Came recommended by a fellow from my grief support group, which I understand now was probably not a coincidence, though I can't prove it. Dale came to fix a section of fence, and he was good at it, and he was easy to talk to. And when he found out I lived alone, he sat on my porch for 2 hours after the job was done and just listened to me talk about Rosemary. Nobody had listened to me talk about Rosemary in months. I was so grateful I could have wept. That's a detail I need you to really hear, because it's the whole hinge of it. By then, my friends had run out of things to say. People are kind for a month or two after a death, and then they need you to be better because your grief makes them uncomfortable, And so, without meaning to, they stop asking. So there I was, 8 months in, still drowning, and everyone in my life had quietly agreed I should be swimming by now. And then a stranger sat on my porch and asked me what she was like, and actually waited for the answer and let me talk until the sun went down. I have never in my life been so easy to catch. He didn't have to be clever. He just had to be the one person willing to listen, and he knew it, and he'd probably clocked it about me before he ever picked up a hammer. That's how it starts. Not with a con, with a kindness. A kindness aimed like a rifle. Dale started coming around. Little jobs at first, then just to check on me, then to have coffee. He was 50 or so, said he'd had a rough go, a bad divorce, some money trouble, a daughter he never saw. I felt for him. When his lease fell through, and I had a finished basement apartment sitting empty that Rosemary and I once thought we'd rent out, it seemed like Providence. He'd live downstairs, keep an eye on the old man, handle the repairs, and pay me a little rent when he could. Everybody wins. He never did pay me rent. Not once. I told myself it didn't matter. I had plenty. Here's the thing about Dale that I only understand now. Looking back with the clarity you get after the house is already on fire. He was patient. My God, was he patient. He didn't rush anything. Over the course of a year, he became indispensable to me, one small favor at a time. He drove me to appointments. He helped with my mail, my bills, my online banking that I pretended to understand better than I did. He knew I'd run a bank for 38 years, and he flattered that constantly. Walt, you're sharper with money than anybody I ever met, while very slowly, very gently, taking the reins of every dollar I had, right out of my sharp old hands. And it wasn't just the money. It was everything, one thread cut at a time. He started sorting my mail so it doesn't pile up, and after a while I never saw a bank statement again. He set up that auto pay on my accounts so I wouldn't have to worry, and after that I stopped looking at what went out. When my buddy Gene from the bank called to get me out to the Tuesday breakfast we'd done for 20 years, Dale would take a message that somehow never quite reached me, and mention later that Gene had seemed like he was mostly after something. Little by little, the people who'd known me 40 years got quietly rerouted, and the only voice left in my house was Dale's, telling me who to trust. Which was Dale. Only ever Dale. That's the whole con, right there, and it works on the sharpest people alive because it isn't aimed at your intelligence. It's aimed at your loneliness. And grief had left mine wide open, like a vault with the door hanging off the hinge. And the whole time, he was working on Marcus. That was the part one didn't see. It was never anything you could point to. Just a slow, steady erosion. Your son called again? Boy, he really keeps tabs on you, huh? Almost like he's waiting on something. A little laugh. I'm just saying, Walt, be careful. When a man dies, you find out real quick which of his kids was in it for the money. He'd say kind, concerned, looking out for me. And I, a lonely old fool who missed his wife, let a stranger I'd known for a year make me suspicious of the son who called me every single day. I remember the exact moment it took hold, though I didn't know its weight then. Marcus had driven over one Sunday with a folder of his own, my accounts printed out, little yellow flags on the pages, because that's how a careful accountant shows he's worried. He wanted to sit down and go through them with me. And Dale, who happened to be in the kitchen, caught my eye behind Marcus's back and gave the smallest shake of his head. Just that. And I found myself telling my son I was tired, that we'd look at it another time, that he didn't need to be poking through his father's money like I was already in the ground. Marcus put the folder away and looked at me for a long moment, and there was a hurt in it I chose not to see, and he left. And Dale said, once the door closed, he means well, probably. But you watch. It's always the quiet one. I nodded along. I nodded along to the man robbing me, about the son trying to save me. That's how thoroughly it works. The fight came about 14 months in. Marcus sat me down, gently, the way he does everything, and told me he'd been looking at my accounts, the ones I'd given him access to years ago, and that money was going out of them that he couldn't explain. Withdrawals, checks made out to cash, a credit line I didn't remember opening. He asked me, careful as anything, whether Dale had access to my finances. And I got angry. I got angry at my son, because Dale had spent a year preparing me to. I told Marcus he was jealous, that he'd never liked Dale, that he was just like Dale had warned me, circling, waiting for me to die so he could count the money. I said things to my son across that kitchen table that I would give my remaining years to take back. And Marcus, God bless him, didn't yell. He just went pale and quiet, and he said, Dad, I love you, and I'm scared for you, and I don't know how to help you if you won't let me. And he left. He had a trip already planned, a week in Cancun with his girlfriend, booked months before, a big deal for a careful man who never spent money on himself. He almost canceled it to keep working on me. I told him to go. I practically shoved him out the door. Part of me, the part Dale had built, was glad to have him gone. Glad to have the last voice of reason on a beach 2,000 miles away. Unreachable. That's where things stood on the Thursday the pipe broke. Now here's the small thing that saved my life, though it didn't feel like anything at the time. It felt like a rebellion. The upstairs bathroom started leaking down into the kitchen ceiling. A real leak, water spreading across the plaster. And Dale wasn't home. He'd been gone 2 days, said he was visiting his daughter, which I now know was a lie. And normally I'd have waited for Dale, because Dale handled everything. But I was tired, and the ceiling was dripping, and some small stubborn part of me that used to run a bank got fed up. I did a thing I hadn't done on my own in a year. I opened a phone book and I hired my own plumber, a young fellow named Cody from an outfit across town. He showed up within the hour, went down to the basement to trace the leak to its source, because the drip in the kitchen was coming from a pipe that ran down through the basement wall, the wall of Dale's apartment. I was upstairs making the boy a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was Cody, calling me from the basement, 40 feet away, and I knew before he said a word that something was wrong, because a man doesn't call you from inside your own house unless he's found something he doesn't want to walk upstairs and say to your face. Mr. Beck. His voice was unsteady. Sir, I had to open up the wall behind the vanity down here to get at the pipe. And there's a space back here. Somebody built a hidden compartment into the wall. And sir, it's full of stuff. I think you need to come see this. And I really think you need to call the police. I want you to sit with me in that moment, friend, because I have replayed it 1,000 times. I stood in my own kitchen, holding a cup of coffee for a stranger, and I felt the floor of my life tilt under me, the way it must feel on a ship when the sea first turns. Because some part of me, the old bank man, the part that had been muffled for a year under grief and loneliness in Dale's steady, patient voice, some part of me already knew that my son had been right, already knew what I'd traded him away for. Down those stairs I went. Cody had pulled the vanity out from the wall, and behind it, where there should have been nothing but studs and pipe, someone had built a cavity, a careful one, and it was packed. The first thing I saw was Rosemary's jewelry box, the good one, the one that had gone missing 8 months back, that Dale had helped me search the whole house for, that he'd gently suggested I must have misplaced in my grief, maybe even given away and forgotten. My wife's rings, her mother's pearls, 46 years of anniversaries that I had wept over losing, that I had blamed my own failing memory for, sitting in a hole in the wall. I sat down on the cold basement floor. I couldn't help it. My legs just went. And then Cody, quiet now, careful, started handing me the rest of it, piece by piece, and each piece was worse than the last. My passport, which I'd reported lost and paid to replace. A stack of my mail I'd never seen, bank statements, unopened, going back a year, intercepted before they ever reached my hands. $9,000 in cash, banded in bundles the way I used to band them at the branch, which told me something too. This was a man comfortable with cash, practiced with it. A second cell phone, a cheap one, not Dale's usual. A ring of keys, and I recognized my own house key on it, and my safe deposit box key that I kept in a drawer upstairs, and a manila folder. Each thing landed in my lap heavier than the one before. I remember the basement was cold, and the pipe was still dripping somewhere behind the wall, a small patient sound, and young Cody's hands were shaking almost as bad as mine, and I kept saying, okay, every time he handed me something, okay, like a man agreeing to blows. Then I opened the folder with hands that did not feel like mine, and inside, laid out neat, was the whole architecture of my ruin. Photocopies of every account I had, my social security card, and sheet after sheet of paper where someone had practiced, over and over, line after line, the way a child practices penmanship, my signature. Walter Beck, Walter Beck, Walter Beck. Dozens of them, getting better down the page, until the last ones were near perfect. And underneath all of that, a legal document. A durable power of attorney, mostly filled out, granting Dale Rooker complete control over the affairs of Walter Beck. Waiting for one thing. A signature it wouldn't even need me to provide, now that someone had practiced it to perfection. I had run a bank for 38 years. I had taught 100 young people how to spot exactly this. And I had let it be built, brick by brick, in a hole in my own wall, by a man I'd handed my house and my mail and my grief. Let me stop here and be honest with you about something, because I think it matters to whoever's watching this who's ever been where I was. The worst part, sitting on that floor, was not the money. It wasn't even the practice signature or the power of attorney or knowing I'd been robbed. The worst part was Marcus. The worst part was every word I'd screamed at my son across that kitchen table. Every day he'd called, and I'd been short with him because Dale had gotten into my head. The look on his face when he said he was scared for me and didn't know how to help. My careful, quiet boy had seen this coming from a mile off, had tried to stand between me and it, and I had called him a vulture and shoved him onto a plane. I sat on that basement floor, 71 years old, and for the first time since Rosemary's funeral, I put my face in my hands and I sobbed. Not for the money, for my son. If you're still with me, friend, do an old man that kindness and tap subscribe before I tell you what I did next. Because I'll tell you when the crying stopped. The crying stopped the moment I remembered who I used to be. Because here's the thing that Dale, for all his patience, never bothered to learn about me. He knew I'd run a bank. He flattered me about it every day. But he thought it was just a story an old man told to feel important. He never once considered that 38 years of catching people exactly like him doesn't wash out a man just because he got old and sad. I stood up off that floor. My knees didn't want to, and I made them. I told Cody he'd done exactly right, and I meant it. That scared young man may have saved my life, and I've since paid to have his whole company's vans re-lettered as a thank you. He tried 3 times to refuse. I told him, yes, we were going to call the police, but that I needed 1 hour first, and I needed him to photograph every single item exactly where it lay, and then touch nothing else. He nodded like a soldier, and I went back upstairs, and I sat down at my own kitchen table in the afternoon light. And something in me that had been asleep for 2 years under all that grief sat up, cracked its knuckles, and got to work. I had been robbed. Fine. I had spent 38 years cleaning up after men who robbed people. I knew exactly, precisely, professionally what to do, and for the first time since Rosemary died, I knew exactly who I was. The first call I made was not to the police. It was to Denise. Denise started as a teller under me 25 years ago, a scared kid who couldn't balance a drawer to save her life. I sat with her after hours until she could. I taught her everything I knew. And today, she runs the fraud department at the very institution I gave my life to. There's a certain justice in that I didn't appreciate until that afternoon, that the girl I'd trained to catch thieves would be the one to catch mine. I called Denise, and in 10 minutes, in the clipped language two bank people speak that nobody else quite follows, I told her what I had. And Denise did 3 things before I'd even hung up the phone. She put a hold on every account in my name. She froze the credit line I never opened, the one Marcus had tried to warn me about across that kitchen table. And she pulled the full transaction history on all of it, going back to the day Dale Rooker first sat on my porch, so that by that evening I would have, in black and white, every single dollar he had walked out of my life over 14 months. The number, when it came, was just under $200,000. 14 months, a little at a time, so I'd never feel the bleed. Exactly, precisely, the way I'd spent 38 years teaching people to watch for. The second call I made was to my son. It was the hardest phone call of my life, harder than telling people Rosemary was gone. I sat at that kitchen table, the same table where I'd called him a vulture, and I dialed. And I got Marcus on a crackling line in a hotel in Cancun, and I could hear the ocean behind him, and music, and people laughing on a beach 2,000 miles from the wreckage of his father's judgment. And I opened my mouth to explain, and nothing came out but his name. Just Marcus. And then it broke out of me. You were right. Son, you were right about all of it, and I'm so sorry, and I need you, and I'll understand if you can't forgive me. And do you know what my boy said? After everything, after the vulture, after the plane, after a year of me choosing a stranger over him, he didn't say I told you so. He didn't ask for one word of the apology I owed him and had rehearsed on the stairs. His voice just went sharp and steady, and he said, Dad, are you safe right now? Is he in the house with you? And when I told him no, Dale was gone, Marcus said, Okay, don't do anything alone. Don't confront anybody. I'm getting the next flight out. I'm coming home. He came home from his one real trip in years, that night, on a red eye, and he sat down next to his father, and he has never once, not to this day, thrown a single word I said back in my face. I don't know where a boy learns to be that much better a man than his father. From his mother, I expect. But here's where being who I used to be really mattered. Because I didn't want Dale to get away, and I didn't want him to do to the next lonely widower what he'd done to me. And I knew, from 38 years, that the moment you spook a man like Dale, he vanishes. New town, new name, new grieving stranger. So I didn't confront him. I did the opposite. That second phone, the cheap one from the wall. I'm a bank man, not a technology man, but Marcus's, and when he got home, he got into it. And what was on it finished the whole picture. Text messages to a woman named Tammy, who I would later learn was Dale's partner in this, in every sense. And in those messages, in Dale's own words, was the entire operation, laid out plain. He wrote about me like I was livestock. The old man's almost fully cooked. POA gets signed next month, and then we clean it out, and I'm gone. He wrote, he's so lonely he'd sign his own death certificate if I frown about it. And he wrote the thing that turned my grief into something cold and useful and patient. He wrote about the son I'd pushed away to protect this man, got him to run off his own kid. Kid was the only real threat. We're clear now. We're clear now. And there was more, because Tammy wrote back, once, like the last one, and Dale wrote, easier than the last one. The last one. I was not the first lonely old man Dale Rooker had cooked. Somewhere out there was at least one more, and I would bet my recovered pearls there were others. A whole quiet trail of emptied-out widowers and widows behind this patient. Listening, porch-sitting man, each of them sitting alone right now in a hollowed-out house, blaming their own failing memory the way I'd blame mine. I sat with that phone in my hand for a long time. Reading a man describe my grief as a business opportunity. Reading him take credit for running off my son as the smartest move of the job. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt because it wasn't rage exactly. Rage is hot and loud, and it burns out. What I felt was the cold, level, patient thing I used to feel across a desk from a man passing bad paper. The feeling of a professional looking at a problem he knows how to solve. That did it. That was the moment old Walter Beck, branch manager, decided that Dale Rooker was not going to walk away from this one and go find the next open vault. So he built it. Quiet and complete, the way I'd once taught people to build a fraud case for the prosecutor. Denise pulled every transaction. Marcus documented the phone. The police, a detective named Alvarez, who took one look at the practice signature sheets and the power of attorney and understood exactly what she was looking at, began quietly running Dale Rooker's real name, which was not Dale Rooker, and pulling the thread on the last one. And this is where 38 years earned its keep. Because I knew, the way you only know from having watched it fail 100 times, that a fraud case is won or lost in the first few days, and whether the evidence is clean and the timeline is airtight, and nobody tips the target. I knew not to move a single item out of that wall until it was photographed in place. I knew which transactions would matter to a prosecutor and which were noise. I knew that a durable power of attorney with a practiced signature beside it isn't just theft. It's intent written down in the man's own hand. Alvarez told me later she'd rarely had a victim hand her a case so ready to charge. I told her I hadn't been a victim for 38 years. I'd just forgotten for about 14 months that I wasn't one now. And I did one small thing for myself. One quiet thing. Dale was due back on a Sunday, still believing the old man upstairs suspected nothing, still believing his power of attorney was a month from signed and the vault a month from empty. Before he came back, I went down to that hole in the wall, and I took Rosemary's jewelry box up out of it, and I carried it upstairs, and I put her rings and her mother's pearls back on her dresser, exactly where they'd sat for 46 years, exactly where Dale would see them the second he walked through the house. I wanted him to know, not with a shout, not with a speech, just with that. I wanted the very first thing he understood when he stepped back into that house to be that the wall was open, that the old fool had found the bottom of it, and that the game was finished. And I wanted him to feel for one single second the cold drop straight through the stomach that every one of his victims had felt. I'd earned that much. Rosemary had earned it. He walked in that Sunday afternoon. Marcus and I were sitting in the living room, quiet as two men at church, coffee going cold in front of us. And I watched Dale come through the door with his easy handyman's role, and I watched his eyes drift toward the bedroom, toward the dresser, toward Rosemary's pearls sitting out in the open where they had no business being if the wall was still closed. I watched him understand. The color went out of his face the way it goes out of a man's face when the drawer comes up short, and he knows you know. He turned to run. Detective Alvarez and two officers were already coming up the front walk. They'd been parked around the corner, waiting on a text from Marcus that said he's inside. He didn't get a run this time. Dale Rooker, that's not his name, but it's the one he wore from me, is awaiting trial now on a stack of charges as tall as the folder he built in my wall. Fraud, forgery, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and once Detective Alvarez found the last one, an 80-year-old woman 2 states over whose family had never been able to prove what happened. A good deal more. He is not going to sit on any more porches for a long, long time. The bank recovered most of the money. Denise saw to that. And Tammy, it turns out, kept her own records on Dale, the way partners in that life always do. And when the walls closed and she traded every one of them for herself. My son moved back into town. Not into my basement, we gutted that apartment down to the studs, pulled out every hidden thing that man had built into my house, and it's a workshop now, and it doesn't hold anything in its walls but tools and sawdust. Marcus lives 10 minutes away. He still calls me every single day, same as he did after his mother died, and I have never once since that basement floor failed to feel the full weight of what those calls are. A son who kept loving a father who'd chosen a thief over him and just kept calling every day, waiting for the old man to come back to himself. I told him the whole story. All of it. Every ugly word I'd said across that table. The head shake in the kitchen I'd obeyed. The folder of his I'd waved away. I made myself say all of it out loud because he'd earned hearing me own it. And he forgave me before I'd even finished. Just reached across and put his hand on my arm and said, "Dad, you were grieving, and a professional found you at the worst moment of your life." That's not a character flaw. That's just what it looks like when someone gets hunted. That's the boy Rosemary raised. That's the son I nearly signed away, along with everything else, to a man in my basement. I wear Rosemary's wedding ring on a chain around my neck now. It came out of that wall, and it's never leaving me again. For 38 years, I taught young people one truth about my business, and I'll leave you with it, because it turned out to be the truest thing I know about people, too. Anybody can smile at the counter. Anybody can be friendly and helpful and easy to talk to. That's not trust. That's the performance of trust, and the good ones can perform it all day long. Real trust is an account, and the only way to know the true balance is to count it. Twice. Especially the friendly ones. Especially the ones who show up right when you're too broken to count. Dale spent a year certain he'd found a lonely old fool too far gone to see what was happening in his own house. He never once thought to ask what that old fool did for 38 years. And he never understood the one thing my son knew all along, that the man was lonely, yes, and grieving and stupid with it. But not gone. Never all the way gone. Just waiting under all that grief to remember how to count the drawer. Now here's my question, and I mean it because I go back and forth on it still. My son saw the truth a year before I did, and I called him a vulture for it and push him onto a plane. Do you think a father can really be forgiven for that? For choosing a stranger over his own child when the child was only trying to save him? Marcus says there's nothing to forgive. I'm not sure I believe him. Tell me how you see it down in the comments. If this story meant something to you, do an old man that kindness, subscribe, hit like, and go call the person in your family who keeps calling you. They might be seeing something you can't. And count your drawer twice, friend. Especially when a friendly stranger offers to count it for you. I'll see you next time.